Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. With us this evening is Mr. Khaled El Sayed, Managing Director of the Synergy Strategic Center. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Today in Islamabad, in Pakistan, the 48th session of the Organization of Islamic Conference was launched. This year the theme is building partnerships for unity, justice and development.
Yes.
How does the theme, in your opinion, reflect on what's taking place around us? The title, let us start off with that.
Well, let's start off with, first, it's important to acknowledge that this organization, it's the second largest global organization. It has 57 countries in 4 different continents, so it's really a significant event today. Now, when we talk about just the very first beginning, unity. We're faced by the COVID crisis. We're faced by the before that was the U.S.-China trade war. We are faced by many challenges right now, including the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well. And more, the term unity is coming up. More and more, we're realizing that our problems transcend borders and that they require true partnerships that are actually effective in their mechanisms to be able to combat our challenges.
Yes.
We're talking about climate change as well. Overall, we are noticing that nations cannot act on themselves, and right now we're seeing also an increased trend of somehow unilateral movement from some states, and hence the importance of really the call of unity to bring everyone back to the same table, bring everyone back to a same common cause for a better prosperity for mankind, basically.
Okay, a number of issues were discussed.
Yes.
If we take the key issues that were addressed, for example, Yemen.
Yep.
How can we apply unity, justice and development in Yemen?
It's a complex situation. Well, on the one hand, we do need to ensure peace and prosperity for Yemen. We've seen a lot of suffering happening there. We've seen many famines happen there over the past years. But we've also seen that with this injustice that happens to the Yemeni people, it becomes a breeding ground for attacks on other neighboring states as well. So hence we've seen also several attacks on the Saudi Arabia and on the United Arab Emirates. And Yemen is actually one of the most things that were discussed today, proposing a transitionary phase for Yemen after a little bit of stability, after which basically we would have, if I would say it, an independent Yemen once again, hopefully.
Libya. Now here it's a complex situation. We've been bracing ourselves for elections.
Yes.
Elections have been postponed. We're still bracing ourselves and keeping our fingers crossed that elections will actually materialize and our western borders will be settled.
Stabilized. Yes. So again, the call for the acknowledgement of the efforts of the 5+5 committee in Libya. We're hoping to see presidential elections. We're hoping to see parliamentary elections. Libya is one of the hotspots right now as well, due to the rising oil crisis, because there is a call from Western states right now to increase oil production as much as humanly possible. And Libya is certainly one of the nations that could contribute significantly on that front. So everybody's looking forward to that a little bit. Everybody's looking forward to Libya getting back on the global stage for itself. But as he said, it is a complex situation. It is there are still a lot of factions in Libya. Our western borders have been kept secure primarily by the Egyptian armed forces. But we would like to see also Libya contributing to that security as well, not just here, but also very important part of today's discussions were the call for the evacuation of all mercenaries from Libya. Basically, an indirect call to preventing any sort of outsider intervention on sovereign land in Libya.
Sudan. Let's go south.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, Sudan is another one of those complicated situations where we're not seeing a lot of development happen over the past while.
Yes.
We've seen it plummet into a little bit of chaos, and then it got a little bit stabilized, and right now we're not seeing any kind of developments. So again, all of this just highlights the cause again for unity, for not intervening in sovereign nations, but for assisting sovereign nations to stand up and get back on their feet, because the list goes on. You have Iraq. You have you have a long list.
I'm taking you clockwise.
Yeah. So you have a long list of nations that were pivotal for stability in the region, and that are no longer or that are being considered as failed states for the time being as well. So again, the call for unity, the call for justice, the call for true partnerships is I think a very correct theme of the conference today.
Somalia. Now, this is another area whereby we have also a grave humanitarian crisis.
Yes. Well, not just a humanitarian crisis, but it's also been affecting global trade for quite some time, because as we've seen, history repeats itself. Whenever there's a ground for where injustice and grievances are occurring, and whenever there's a deteriorating economic situation, the people will have to strive to survive eventually. And so we've seen that impact global trade quite significantly over the past while. And that's what put Somalia back on the map again. We are hoping again to have parliamentary elections in Somalia. We're hoping that the elections take place, and not just take place, but also take effect after they've taken place, because enforcing the elections has always been a challenge as well in Somalia.
One of the critical issues in this region is, and in the Islamic world, is the Palestinian question.
Yes.
One of the oldest problems or crises, and one of the crises which, unless it is resolved, peace and stability will not be achieved.
Definitely. I think everybody, at least let me talk about Egypt. Everybody in Egypt grew up with the Palestinian cause embedded in his genome, one way or the other. And even though we have seen a little bit of deviation from that cause over the past 2-3 years, we do see it being brought back again to the table today. And for me personally, it is a sigh of relief to hear nations talk again about the two-state solution, to talk about the 1976 borders, and bring back these topics back on the table and say that we are not going to deviate from it. Saudi Arabia was very clear in their statement today around this issue, that they will continue supporting Palestine, they will continue supporting the two-state solution, and they will continue pushing for the 1967 borders, which is what was internationally acknowledged as well. So I mean, we're not talking from thin air here. Egypt has always supported that claim, and will always continue to support that claim from where I see things. Also we have in Egypt's statement today, it was quite clear that we refuse any unilateral movements that may work to dilute the two-state solution one way or the other. So that was a very tricky diplomatic statement to be made, but a very strong one as well today, enforcing our position in Egypt.
The situation in Syria. Now, this is another grave humanitarian crisis. Definitely. Which affected the world at large. You have a lot of Syrian refugees. You have a crisis that does not see light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes. We're seeing a little bit of light right now with the past trip from His Excellency Bashar al-Assad to the UAE. That was the first interaction on an official in an official capacity. So we are seeing a little bit of movement back to attempt to put Syria back on track. Now, the Syrian people have suffered more than enough. It has turned into the boxing ring of global powers. So we had the Americans there, we had the Russians there, we had the Chinese there, we had every single force to be reckoned with was present in Syria. And right now, it is also part of the mission of ensuring the region's stability is to ensure that whatever is going on in Europe does not cascade and fall back to Syria here. It doesn't end up in another proxy war, reigniting the issues in Syria as well.
One of the theme is partnership.
Yeah.
How can countries that are members of the OIC partner to resolve pressing issues? You mentioned earlier with the situation in Libya, the mercenaries that have entered. Unfortunately, those mercenaries are not just in Libya.
Yes.
You have foreign hands that are meddling elsewhere in this region. How can they partner to confront that?
Well, on several aspects actually. So intelligence sharing and intelligence cooperation has been one of the most effective tools that several states have been using. We've had that between Egypt and between Saudi Arabia, and between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and Egypt and UAE as well. However, we would like to see that a little bit more cascade over other countries as well, because that, you know, having access to information, having access to intelligence is quite important in combating this. Now, we need to step a little bit back and also acknowledge that one of the most important things that happened in the summit was acknowledging that the UN has ratified the 15th of March, or agreed that the 15th of March be declared as the Global Day Against Islamophobia. And there is a reason for that, because you know, Islamophobia has been turning through a lot of studies, it has been diagnosed as a pandemic that is sweeping also the Western world right now, putting people in the crosshairs just for being Muslims, just for being diagnosed as Muslims or appearing as Muslims, often misinterpreted with immigration, often misinterpreted with refugees, but it's just become a synonym for that, which brings back the case that, you know, Islamic entities, Islamic states need to start uniting to project the image of the religion that we have embraced, which is a peaceful image, which is an image that is not a synonym for violence, because that is what is being exported.
Isn't that a campaign that is in a way deliberately orchestrated by certain powers and publicized for by Western media?
100%. I wouldn't exactly say Western media. I would say specific factions within Western politics. Now, you need to understand that also refugees are one of the most important topics for any political election going on in the West, going on in the United States, to be more exact. Right now, it's also rising in Europe. We're seeing a lot of a rise in a nationalistic approach right now that is sweeping the globe. So we've seen that with the Trump era in the United States. We're seeing that also with the Democrats right now with Joe Biden. We're also seeing that in Brazil. We've seen that in Holland. So there are several examples of where a nationalistic trend is being pushed again to the forefront of media. And one of the key topics of that is definitely Islamophobia, because that is how you scare people. You get to control people when you scare them. And Islamophobia is always synonym for, you know, having a large beard, being a very rigorous Muslim, and just wanting to kill Westerners. That's how it's being interpreted.
How can the OIC countries stand in the face of that? Because it's really the power of pictures.
Definitely. definitely. It's a
stronger than
marketing.
1,000 words. And,
Yes.
and there are pictures. You have the cinema is playing a role, drama, let's put
Yes.
it that way, is playing a role, media is playing a role, politicians are playing a role, and unfortunately, so-called Islamic factions
Yes.
that are carrying out atrocious actions are also playing a role.
100%.
How can OIC countries counter that?
Well, for a start, the only way to rid the world of this problem is by ridding it of terrorism, and terrorism just happens to happen right now in failed states. That is where it is a fertile ground for recruitment, for training purposes, for illegal arms trading, for everything. And so the very first thing that should be in focus is getting back Islamic states, countries like Afghanistan, countries like Pakistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, just preventing these breeding grounds from being in any way accommodating for any faction to spend their time there and to train there and to grow there, and consolidate their forces. So, so I think that is one of the most important things that have to be done. The second is you can only combat ideas with ideas, right? So you can only combat marketing campaigns with marketing campaigns. You need to keep on pushing the agenda that Islam is a peaceful religion. Islam does not call for this, and you need to completely oust these factions from within the society. I think Egypt has done a lot of really good progress on that part, but there is still more progress that needs to happen as well. So that is the second thing on that aspect. But I think that this is more of a long-term issue that we are still going to face for quite some time, because it is not going to be solved overnight.
We've talked about the concept of Islamophobia for years, quite frankly. To be specific, for 11 years,
Yes.
We've been talking about, since 9/11, actually more than 11 years, we've been talking about this since 9/11, that how people are misinformed about Islam, how there's a deliberate stereotyping of this religion. We've tried numerously to address this issue, and to no avail, really, because it's really an apolitical agenda, so to speak.
100%. Started off with the war on terror, actually a little bit before the war on terror campaign that was launched over 20 years ago right now, by 9/11. But also it was also fostered due to lack of action from Islamic countries at that time.
Yes.
There needed to be a more immediate action after 9/11, which did not happen. One of the worst things that happened was the power vacuum that was left in Iraq by the US. That was one of the worst decisions, to dissolve the military, dissolve the intelligence services, dissolve the police force, creating basically the most fertile ground for ISIS to thrive, basically, and that was it, and that was what sent the whole region into a turmoil. So being able to foresee issues and foresee problems that will cause a high risk in the future is one of the key things that we still need to work on and address. However, also on the same thing, we note that the 15th of March is also just happens to be the date of the Christchurch attacks in New Zealand, where over 50 people were attacked in a mosque.
Yes.
And actually, on this front, New Zealand has actually led the world and showed them a different way of dealing with a problem, refusing to be dragged into the Islamophobia debate, refusing to take extreme measures. That was one of the ways how global leaders can actually lead by example and show a different approach to the problem.
Unity, partnership for unity. Can there be a unified stand that OIC countries can come out with to at least push for an international recognition of terrorist organizations? because maybe one of the first things we need to confront also is who is a terrorist? Who qualifies as a
Definitely.
terrorist versus freedom fighter or a religious group or whatever. I mean, the line is very, very thin.
It is very thin, and it's not just very thin, it's also always changing. So a couple of years back, we used to look at the Taliban as a terrorist organization. Right now, they are not anymore. So how do you define the terrorism? I think it is possible that the OIC could push for such an agenda. However, in order to do that, it is very important for the OIC countries to actually first agree on the definition of the terrorist organizations, because there is also a conflict on who is a terrorist, as you've said, and who isn't right now.
Hasn't the time for us to consolidate efforts on that, since the word terrorism is marring our religion in a way?
It is definitely overdue, but how high up is this in the agenda of other nations? That is the question. We are for sure seeing this being more and more a pressing issue for the leading countries within the Middle East here. So we're seeing this in Egypt, we're seeing this in Saudi Arabia, Jordan as well, and the UAE have been pushing more and more towards this. But is this high up in the ranking of political issues for other countries? We need to also acknowledge that there are some nations that benefit from terrorism. So there are some nations which are considered as failed states that actually benefit from this and that have economic wins in this as well. So it is a more complicated issue than it is, but we can definitely agree on at least the top terror organizations that where there is absolutely no doubt for them. However, even that we were unable to correctly do over the past while, so that needs a little bit of more push here.
Development, partnership for development, and definitely the world is in dire need of development. I mean, we've suffered the past 3 years from COVID, moving on to a war. I mean, really, we're facing very, very difficult times.
Yes, definitely.
In your opinion, how can the OIC countries consolidate efforts for development? How can we protect our economies? How can we exchange know-how and support to ensure that this difficult phase, nobody further falls? Okay,
well, on the development front, it is also important to acknowledge today the request from Egypt to ratify the bylaws of the Women Development Organization, which Egypt is hosting here in Cairo. That is one of the first and most important things, because women empowerment has been on the agenda today. It has been said it has been talked about by different countries, and it is at the forefront of the agenda. And women empowerment is a very important and key topic, because without women empowerment, you continue risking that countries fall back into a failed state. You continue lack of education, you continue lack of nutrition for children. So, you need to address it from a more of a holistic approach. We're also seeing today the Afghanistan Humanitarian Trust Fund that has been developed in an attempt to prevent Afghanistan from slipping back to where it was a couple of years back. So we do need a platform, and we need a mechanism of knowledge sharing. We need a mechanism of cooperation. We need a mechanism of free trade agreements between Arab nations and between Islamic nations as well. We need to complement each other with our skills rather than compete with them. And we need to ensure that we survive together and alleviate ourselves together, because that is the only way. If we do not put this at the forefront of our agenda, what will happen is some nations will prosper, others will not, but then the prosperous nation will always have to care for the non-prosperous nations, and we will keep on going in this circle the whole time. So without us alleviating ourselves, without us ensuring a stable region and ensuring a stable countries, we will not be able to alleviate ourselves from this right now.
You mentioned something important, which is the role of women. This is also another critical issue in our part of the world. The development of the role of women.
Yes.
The recognition of the value of women and the propagation of that.
Well, there's a very big gap between, if you say, the role of women in Egypt, especially in Cairo, or in the United Arab Emirates or in Jordan, versus if you're talking about in Afghanistan or elsewhere. So we need to acknowledge that women are 50% of the population, and by not empowering this 50%, we are only going to be as efficient as we are right now. We need, and that is also another important part of Islamophobia, is how is it projected that we treat our women. Now, we've seen a lot of nations do a lot of really big strides in this. We've seen Saudi Arabia changing this mindset over the past 3 or 4 years by allowing women to drive and etc., and giving women more rights. But we are far from there yet. We are by far not there. Women need to be living in a community where they feel safe, where they are able to care for their children, where they are able to have exactly the same rights without segregation,
yes.
Where they're able to participate in the labor force without any discrimination in pay, for example. So without ensuring this, our economies will not be as efficient as we hope they can be. There is only so much that men can do on their own without empowering women. That is just a fact. It's a numbers game.
Part of development is education.
Yes.
The backbone,
yes,
actually, of development is education.
Definitely.
How do you see us consolidating efforts on that front? Because really, you don't want just a strong country, but you want a strong region.
Yes. Well, you will never have a strong country without a proper education. That is something that history has taught us. You will never have a strong nation without a strong economy, and without and even in nations where we had thought previously that there was unendless wealth due to fossil fuels or whatever it is, that is not the case anymore. The world is becoming much more competitive, and the world is becoming much more of a difficult economy. And we need more diversified economies. We need more knowledge-based economies. That is something that we have established over the past years. Now, how do we work on the education front? Again, we do not have a specific mechanism for knowledge sharing between Islamic nations and each other. We used to have that 50, 60 years back, but that is not the case anymore. And I think that, again, bringing us back to the theme of partnerships, of cooperation, of delegations, of offering scholarships, of sending scholars and cooperating on the knowledge transfer. That is a very important part of the role of the organization that should be that they should be leading as well on.
Youth,
yeah.
Because it so happens that most of those OIC countries, over 60% of their population is from the young generation.
Definitely.
Empowering youth. And when I say empowering youth, this is a critical factor to ensuring healthier development.
Yes.
Most of fanatic movements are really carried out by the youth.
Definitely.
It's an older mind who's masterminding the whole issue, but the implementation on the ground, the danger factor is those who are brainwashed are the young people.
Yes. It's not a causality that because they are young they are recruited. It is a causality that because there are grievances, because there is injustice, which brings us to the second part of the theme of the conference. Because there is injustice,
yes.
There are grievances, and whenever there are grievances, there are people who are willing to take matter into their own hands.
Yes.
They're also always susceptible to the concept of You are doing this for God. You are doing this because they killed your brother, or they killed your mother, or they killed. If these issues are not addressed, we will never be eradicating the root cause of the issue. We will only be combating the symptoms of it. As you've clearly said, yes, we do have a youth bulge in most of the Islamic countries, but we are still seeing youth, or we're still looking at youth as a national security issue rather than as an opportunity for development, because it is just as risky not engaging the youth in development, because you're wasting of manpower, you're wasting of energy that could be otherwise utilized for development. But it is a generational war that has always been ongoing. However, we're starting to see it more and more often right now because of this youth bulge that has appeared.
How can we protect the minds of our future generations? Because, as you were saying, there is injustice.
Yes.
There is vulnerability, which is being capitalized on. How can we protect the young minds?
Well,
how can we ensure that they're heard? Some countries are actually giving them a platform now.
Yes.
I mean, here in Egypt,
yes,
for the first time we have a conference for the
yes,
youth,
the World Youth
which
Forum.
even turned into an international conference.
Definitely.
But how can we ensure that their voice is heard, their participation is there, they're taught strategic thinking? How can you enhance and empower them efficiently?
Well, I would say there are several fronts that you can work on. The first front, most importantly, is by empowering women, because without empowering women, without giving proper education, giving proper knowledge to the mothers as well, they cannot care for their children. So you end up with a not so efficiently educated youth bulge as well. So the first step is empowering women. The first step, the next step after that is including always a participatory approach when you're designing policies. Alleviating trust in the institutions, which we are lacking right now in a lot of countries. And also by combating misinformation. Governing social media is very important. Social media is a very fertile ground for misinformation that is spreading, that spreads sometimes like cancer, and causes us not only money but causes us also lives in some cases. We've seen that very clearly with COVID as an infodemic rising. That actually led to lives being lost just because the incorrect information was disseminated. So being able to govern this correctly, being able to combat misinformation, creating events and conferences such as the World Youth Forum and platforms where youth can participate in with their policymakers as well and be part of the discussion, creating a collaborative political environment where youth can contribute in decision making is also one of the very important aspects. I think that is the only way in which you can harness all of that energy and direct it towards development.
What do you think should be addressed? I mean, the conference started today, we still have tomorrow. What's a critical issue that you would have liked to see addressed, or you hope would be addressed in this conference before it wraps up?
Well, one of the major issues that we're seeing is, as I said, the lack of a standardized definition for terrorist organizations. That is something that needs to be clearly defined. That is something that we are really looking forward to. Another is collaboration on the healthcare perspective. We're seeing a lot of the states in which we have mentioned today, they're not only torn by conflict, but they're also torn by a pandemic. We need to always remember that. And there are serious healthcare repercussions there. So to avoid the long-term effects of a failing healthcare institution, we need to also provide collaboration on healthcare as well, and nutrition for the kids. We need to make sure that the younger generation in these areas, especially the children that are kept in camps in some countries, have actually the chance of a resemblance of a proper childhood, because otherwise we are preparing soldiers for the future as well, for other terrorist
If you have
organizations.
refugees left and right,
Exactly.
you are preparing soldiers.
Exactly, and that is something that I would seriously, from a personal perspective, like to see addressed here. How are we treating the children in these areas? How are we ensuring that the next generation is able to rectify the position in which their countries are in, is able to contribute to its development as well. So that
if you're thrown out of your home, you see your country being war-torn, you're sleeping in camps, you hear people in countries, you face abuse at borders, and you hear people complaining, nationals in different countries complaining about your presence. What kind of a young person will you grow up into being?
It is probably not a sane young person. It is probably someone that is going to be very troubled. But I would also say it that way. We have seen this example in Palestine for quite some time, and we know of a lot of successful Palestinians that have been forced out of their homes, but they have studied further and they have been educated and they have been accomplished as well. So you can have both sides of the equation. But by ensuring that at least these camps are decent places to live in, by ensuring that that there is no disease there, that there is also a little bit of governance in the camps, because otherwise you're just spreading the message over and over again, and you're creating these grievances over and over again. So you're not solving the issue from its root cause. That for me is something that would be very important to resolve here.
Mm-hmm. What about exchange of resources? You have some countries in OIC area that are quite rich. You have other countries that are rich in manpower or resources. You have countries that are rich in the know-how. And you have very poor countries.
Yes. Well, I wish we had done that a long time ago, honestly. We wouldn't have been in the situation we're in. But then again, each sovereign country has the mandate to care best for its own people. And there is only so much that you can do with partnerships. So yes, the wisdom says that rich countries should help the not so rich countries. Wisdom says that collaborating in a cooperating mechanism and complementing each other is very important. So Egypt can make use of the lands of Sudan, Sudan can make use of know-how in Egypt. Together we can have a successful trade cooperation. That is wisdom in that sense. Same with Saudi Arabia, the same with African nations, with Mali, with Chad, with Sahel. You know, there are so many different countries in which the same would apply. But we need to set aside our differences. We need to highlight a common goal of prosperity, because the alternative is a risky situation for everyone. It's not going to only affect the failed states, or it's not going to affect the weak states. It's also going to affect the stronger states, and we're seeing that very clearly right now with Saudi Arabia. You know, they have a very prosperous nation. They have solid national security. However, they are still being attacked by the Houthis every now and then, and you cannot live in security when your country is being attacked by drones the whole time. You know, there is nothing that you know, that's also incomprehensible. So eventually you're going to increase your military spending, and you're going to go through this whole circle over and over again. So unless they set aside their differences, agree on some common goals, agree on a common platform from where we would like to launch this, I think that would be the only way forward.
And do you think that organizations such as the Organization of Islamic Conference, the Arab League, and institutions or organizations like that, can they help resolve those differences?
Now, honestly, I believe that these organizations provide a good platform for collaboration and for cooperation. However, we are seeing a trend overall in the whole world right now to move to more of clustering of partnerships of countries. So it's a shift from the post-World War II era, where we were looking towards the UN, for example, and everything. We're shifting more away from the multilateral organizations and moving more towards closer collaborations between clusters of countries that share the same interests. So I think that is proven to be more effective right now in addressing specific challenges, rather than the larger cooperation, the larger organizations for the time being.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
Our
you,
time
Lina.
is up, and thank you for your fruitful input. I'd like to thank you, the viewers, wish you a very pleasant evening, and we'll see you same time next week. Until then, good night.